Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our Lattes and Learning series this morning. I'm Amy McCoy. I'm the marketing manager over here at Ongoing Operations, and I'll serve as a bit of your moderator today as we go through the presentation. So today our topic is, where your PII is and strategies for securing sensitive personal information. And our two presenters are going to be John Derby, who's our CIO, and Shane Butcher, who's our Senior Solutions and Security Architect, as well as our virtual CISO. And the format's going to be about a 15 to 20-minute presentation. We'll allow 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. If you have questions as we're going through, please feel free to type them into the question box on the screen, and I'll go ahead and relay those over to the team. If you also at the end have questions where you want to just ask them, just go ahead and if you click raise your hand, I'll go ahead and set you so you can unmute yourself and ask your question that way as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick it over to Jonathan to start, and I hope everyone's got a coffee or a latte, and we can sit down and enjoy.
All right, good morning, everybody. I hope you've got that latte ready. Talking through PII, so hopefully no one falls asleep here. It's actually a pretty fascinating topic. Credit unions, by their nature, we have a tremendous amount of sensitive data in PII. We've got records, we got mortgages, loans, banking records, etc. We're always going to have it on our network, right? That's just a fact of business. And when we think about security as credit unions, we spend a tremendous amount of time protecting ourselves at the edge, firewalls, IDS, IPS, everything everything in the world. Really think about how do we stop from getting on our network. What we don't always do is spend a tremendous amount of time on how do we actually protect the data that's already on our network in a layered fashion. And that a lot of it has to do with knowing where your sensitive information is and how to put safeguards around it. So we're going to spend some time talking about that today. Additionally, we will at the end of this talk about how this also can apply to remote access users, which has become a lot more relevant in the past few weeks. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Shane.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, everybody. So let's start with the really boring part. What is PII, or personally identifiable information? And you'll also hear NCUA refer to it as NPI, or non-public information, which expands on that. But the definition of PII has been expanding over time and with new regulations such as California's CCPA, the EU's GDPR, and with changes to data collection techniques and what providers and businesses are collecting has helped them expand that over time. And we know that PII includes at a very minimum someone's first and last name and one or more of the following: social security number, account number or credit card number with a security code, driver's license or ID number, medical information, and health insurance information are all considered under PII. We also want to look at things like card data too, and other sensitive information as we're talking through securing our PII and sensitive information. And sensitive information could be anything defined by your credit union that you don't want to share with an outside entity. So why do we need to protect it? First we've got regulations, Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, as well as NCUA's 12 CFR Part 748. Give us specific guidelines that we have to protect member data, that we have to protect, the financial information, as financial institutions. Contractually with PCI DSS, and yes, credit unions are beholden to PCI to protect card data and cardholder data without the same responsibilities for verification and reporting that businesses and folks that accept card payments are, but we do need to take that into consideration and the requirements around that. We also want to ensure that we're preventing fraud and identity theft for our members and our employees, and it does, protecting PII does include our employees because we do have sensitive information on our employees. And good citizenship, we want to be good stewards of that data and present a good front to our members and to the world, and we don't want folks losing our PII, so we want to make sure that we do the same for others. So if we look at PII and sensitive information, where should it be stored? And ideally, we want it centrally stored with strong role-based access controls, and then we want to monitor that. So this could be a file system where we've got clearly defined roles where that data has to be stored and only allowing those people to access it. Or, obviously our core system, has a lot of sensitive information in it that we protect with strong controls and need to know access. We also should be storing that data on some sort of encrypted storage, right? So that if the storage, is accessed, an attacker can't read that data without the appropriate encryption key. So we ideally want to keep those all of that type of information encrypted. So as we get to our first poll question, we want to know, do you have a policy specifying that PII or sensitive information should not be stored on desktops and laptops? And that's going to be a yes or no question. We'll give you guys a second to review that. And we'll keep going on, and Amy will update us on the results here in a minute.
Yeah.
So
So we've got about 50% of the votes in, and around 80% are saying yes, and around 20% have said no.
Okay, 80%, that's a great percentage, because we definitely don't want to store PII on our endpoints. That's one of the least secure parts of our network and devices, and one of the easiest to walk out of our facilities, right? And in fact, we give folks, especially now in this remote work day and age, and where we are with the pandemic, the ability to work remotely. So we want to secure where that's stored. So as part of the CISO team, we help folks do analyses of where PII is in their environment, through various formats. And some of the places that we find it, that it probably shouldn't be, or we should know that it is, unsecured file server directories, folks running reports, saving it to a particular location that may not be the right, that too many folks have access to, we find it there. Backup directories, when you're backing up a system to upgrade it or move it, or just through daily backups, if those get forgotten about, or are left in a location that's accessible, we found a lot of PII can be included in system backups. Application folders. We find that a number of applications will utilize their own temp directories outside of let's say the Windows or your browser temp directories, and may keep that data longer than you want. And we've helped some customers identify those applications and worked with their vendors to reduce the amount of time that data may be flushed out, so that we're not exposing the sensitive information any longer than we need to. And then when we look at workstations and laptops, we'll find folks are saving it to their desktop, their documents folder, temp folder when again, applications are generating data, and either your internet temp files or downloads folders when you're downloading those reports to review. A lot of times they're kept in those directories, and we want to know about it, and we want to come up with strategies to make sure that we're addressing that. So how do we find it? There's a number of ways that we do it, and the one that we use very frequently is a confidential information scan tool. That is, we'll go out and you'll run it across all your devices, and it will look for patterns of social security numbers, bank account numbers, card data. It has all sorts of patterns that it looks for and locates those data and lets us know where that data is. And then we're able to run a report and do an analysis of why that data might be there, and address it either with operational controls and administrative and policy controls. There's a number of tools out there that can be run on file servers or all your servers, right? And running both data governance and audit tools where you can set up, it's monitoring the permissions, it's monitoring the file access, it knows, it can scan for the PII and work with you in your classifications, and help you keep governance around the data sets on your file and application servers. And then also using DLP and monitoring tools within cloud-based services like Office 365. Most online tools will allow you to do scans, or a lot of these tools also have the ability to go out and scan your data, whether it's stored in SharePoint, email, all of those tools, but can help you locate that PII in your cloud environments. So we get to our next poll question, which is, do you currently monitor for PII or sensitive information on your devices? And do you do it on your servers or your desktops and laptops, or both, or you don't currently scan for sensitive information? And so we'll go ahead and give everybody a minute to take a look at that. And
so
you guys,
give it a few seconds because we're getting a variety of responses here, Shane.
Okay, all right. We'll go ahead and give it another minute here. Yeah, this is one of those things that is not always done, but is really important to being able to understand how to protect your organization from data breaches. And if we do have a data breach, to know where our data was and what might have been accessed. So
with around 50% of the vote in here, we're seeing about 30% of folks are scanning or monitoring their servers, about 6% desktops and laptops, 30% both servers and desktops and laptops, and about 35% are not currently scanning for sensitive information.
Okay, and that's about what we see. So great data. Thank you, guys. So the other thing we want to look at is, how do we exchange excuse me, PII with members? How do we protect members from themselves, from sending their data over unsecured channels via email, hopefully not texting, but putting social security numbers, card data in any communications with us if they're just doing it. So what can we offer them? First, education, right? Let's make sure in our member communications to remind them to never send any of that data via email, and remind them that we're never going to ask them to send that type of information to us, in email, those sorts of things to help them protect themselves. But also, when we are engaging with them, to have things like file sharing systems for them to upload documents to, secure web portals for messaging, to ensure that we're giving them a secure channel to communicate with us, especially when it involves sensitive information. We also need to look at, what are we doing to protect our email, right? That's a huge potential for leakage of sensitive information and being able to exfiltrate data. So are we running DLP policies on our email systems? Are we looking to see, are we sending financial information, socials, bank information out? And then what are we doing? And are we forcing that data to be encrypted, which still allows it out, right? And we can report on that. Or are we blocking it and making sure that that data goes out through a channel that that requires the active knowledge of that person sending it, so that we maintain control of that data and don't just let anything go out even though it's encrypted. So if we look at our next poll question, how do you protect sensitive data being sent by email? Automatically encrypt it with a DLP system, block sensitive data with a DLP system, or we don't currently monitor email for sensitive data. So I'll give everybody a chance to answer that. And again, another hugely important system to protect our credit unions, and something I know that the NCOA and a lot of the exams that we participate in and help with is a big point of theirs.
So Shane, with about 50% of the vote in again, we're seeing around, keeps changing as I go to report, around 56% of folks are automatically encrypting with DLP system, 33% are blocking sensitive data with the DLP system, and 11% are not currently monitoring email for sensitive data.
Okay, those are the great statistics, and the one thing that we want to start maybe taking a look at, and we've seen a change. And as I work with a lot of our CISO customers, ask them to consider is automatically encrypting is great, right? Because we're not transmitting that now in clear text, and it protects it to some level, but we're still not necessarily knowing what's going in and out unless we're reporting on it or we're alerting on it. And what I've seen a number of credit unions, and we've helped them move to, is blocking that. If it's inadvertently sent in a where we're just emailing it and it catches it, to block that, but then to have a method that you actively do either forcing the encryption in the email or using a secure sending portal, so that we know that user intended to exfiltrate that data, right? And it wasn't done by accident, and we're not just letting data out even though it's encrypted. So some thought, food for thought there on maybe looking at a different approach around dealing with our email data loss preventions. And my apologies, DLP, for anybody that may not know what that means, is data loss prevention, and looking at the data in there to see if we want to identify it and block it. So my apologies for not hitting that the first time around. So what should we be doing to protect our PII and confidential information? First, we want to make sure we know where it is, right? Through those scans, through, inventories. And we don't want to forget any sort of cloud storage. If we're using SharePoint Online, if we're using OneDrive for Business, if we have, Box, any, Google Drive for Business, any of those, we want to make sure that we're understanding what PII is out there, but also on our internal systems. What systems are storing sensitive data? What what directories in our file server, have that? And, do we have the appropriate permissions applied to those areas so that only the folks that need it can get to that data? So we want to make sure that we know where it is. We want to know our data flows. What systems are sending sensitive data to other systems? Do we know all of those flows? And then are those flows encrypted? So we know, a lot of the data coming in and out of our core system definitely contains sensitive information, and hopefully in this day and age, all of those transmission channels are encrypted. But what other systems do we have that we might be sending data from one system to another, or over the network, or to a printer, right, with sensitive information on it? Is that encrypted or not? And we want to know those flows. We want to validate that devices have appropriate encryption. So, the ones that store sensitive data, our core system, our file systems, any of those support systems that are maintaining that sensitive data, we want to make sure that those use some sort of encryption. Any device that leaves our network, all of our laptops, any mobile devices that have access to our data, should always be encrypted. And if we think it might leave the facility, we definitely want it encrypted. Especially backup tapes, that we're sending to offsite facilities, anything like that should always have, a strong encryption. And we want a way of validating it, especially, laptops, et cetera. We want a system to monitor that all of those devices, are actually encrypted, and that something hasn't been done to decrypt those drives. And having a review process and a governance process around that is key. We also want to perform an annual review of permissions, as we were talking about before, on knowing where it is on those systems. We also want to make sure, at least annually, that nobody's been given privileges that they shouldn't, that they're still in those job roles that would require that. So doing an at least annual permission review of your access to sensitive data is key. You also want to make sure your policies address the management and disposal of your sensitive information, right? We want to make sure that we address data classification. How are we classifying it? How are we handling it after we classify it? So what do we classify as, public information, things like our website, sensitive information, or non-public? There's 3 or 4 different ways that we can label these things, but essentially, we need to make sure that we define how we're going to classify specific pieces of data and what they contain, and then how we're going to handle them. We also want to make sure that we define encryption standards and what should be encrypted in our environment. And then data disposal. What are the techniques that we are going to use to dispose, at those various classifications levels? So if it's, we consider it confidential and nobody should see it but a set group of people, we want to make sure that we have different disposal scenarios than we do for, public information, and that they are commensurate with the type of data that's out there. But we definitely want to make sure that those policies are, part of our information security program, and that we follow those policies, and then we have ways of checking up on that. And then lastly, we wanted to talk about remote work practices, which, over the last 30 days has become more prevalent in the credit union world, right? And though they pose remote work definitely poses its own set of challenges when we're dealing with sensitive information, because as credit unions dealing with financial data and card data and member information, we do we do have to worry about that as our folks are working remotely. First, we want to make sure that we've got those policies for no PII on the devices, right? We don't want devices roaming around, even encrypted, right? Encryption is the layered defense that helps us make sure if that device goes lost, it can't be read. But we don't want to start with data on there that we don't want to lose out of our credit union. So we want to make sure we have policies on that. If we're using VDI or virtual desktops or remote, allowing folks to remote into our environment, we want to make sure that those systems are configured so that you can't copy and paste documents in and out of the environment or access your network drives, right? Let's keep that boundary and only allow make sure that the PII stays within our environments. We want to be sure that we include those remote devices in our PII scans, as we talked about a little bit earlier, so that if someone is somehow getting sensitive data out there, we know about it when we're doing our scans. We want to make sure that we're using our DLP tools that we use elsewhere in our network for these devices, so that we know if folks are trying to, or have or trying to exfiltrate any sort of sensitive information or files that they shouldn't, including blocking USB drives, or ensuring that we have strong DLP tools around monitoring what goes on those drives. But the best practice by far is to block USB drives. And then if the best solution is to use credit union owned devices, right? We have controls, we can put our tools on them. We want to make sure that we always have all of our security tools on all those our remote devices. But I know, given current constraints, a lot of credit unions have added some BYOD devices to facilitate this remote work, given a lot of the stay at home and protect their members and their employees. If that is the route that you go, there's, we need to make sure that we have strong policies about what folks can and can't do on those devices. And, the minimum requirements of having current anti-malware software on it, making sure that they're fully patched and set up for automatic patches, and that the anti-malware is updating, that we have our IT folks validate that those two things are true, right? We want to make sure that that we've checked that before we allow them access to our networks. Along with making sure that folks are keeping their home router updated. There are a number of vulnerabilities out there that allow folks to take over some of these home routers, and so making sure that that's updated, that we've got strong Wi-Fi passwords, that folks aren't they're not the neighborhood hotspot, because they haven't secured it. We want to make sure that we address all of these things in our remote work policy, our acceptable use policy, so that we know that they know that the same practices that they have to do at work apply to when they're working from home, right? That we're not going to let those lax, because we're still dealing with the same data. So we want to, as we transition that workforce remote, we want to put those same controls and greater controls around that data as we do when we're in the office. I don't know, John, did you want to add anything to the remote work?
I think you covered it all. So we are seeing a huge transition from the credit industry, where we had a small percentage of the workforce that's working from home. That's grown tremendously. So and now that credit unions, I think there was very, very reactive, or becoming more proactive, is to get back in front of some of the security concerns that come with remote access employees. Another thing, I think Amy put it in here, we did put together a best practices white paper for remote access employees. I encourage folks to download it. Covers what you want, as well as, hey, you know, where we don't start off recommending BYOD, it is a reality for a lot of credit unions right now. And if you do that, hey, here's a checklist of things you should be accounting for. And I think at this point, I think it's probably best to go into Q&A.
Yep.
Yeah, so I have at least, so go ahead, guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to type those into the question section, and John and Shane can answer them. If you'd rather ask your question, of course, go ahead and raise your hand and I can unmute you. We did have one question come in while you were talking that I just wanted to save to the end to ask you, Shane. Now we had one that said, we use Gmail as our email provider. Does that qualify as a DLP system?
So I would have to double check all of the settings, but Gmail does have DLP tools within it, as well as the encryption ability. But you would have to check the specific configuration and any licensing, you know, within the Google Apps. But to the best of my knowledge, it does have DLP functionality in it.
And to add to that, a lot of times it's looking at your configuration and settings, which is the most important. Same with Office 365. It is certainly DLP capable. It has all sorts of ways to be configured and deployed, but it comes down to how you've actually configured and deployed those settings.
Yes, correct.
Any other questions? I went ahead and gave you guys permission to unmute yourself if you want to just ask your question rather than type it in. And then we did have one more that came in. Where is that form we can download for the checklist? Oh, the checklist is actually part of our full white paper on best practices for working from home. So I went ahead and put that link in the chat. If otherwise, you could, of course, go on the Ongoing Operations website, and it's under our ebooks for VPN, but I will put that in there as well for you. And one more, guys, we encrypt all of our laptops and restrict access to everything but the shared drives. Is that a good practice?
So I guess the question is well, it will depend, right? If you are utilizing, or allowing the laptops to directly access your applications, so they're accessing, directly from that laptop and not using a virtual desktop or remoting into their work laptop, then you generally are going to have to allow that, right? But if we're using something like virtual desktop or remote desktop where we're controlling a device that's inside the network, then we definitely want to restrict those types of activities. But you may need to allow the access to the shared drives from your laptops depending on your business case. And then again, having those strong controls around making sure we've got, we're not allowing sensitive information on the laptops, that it's maintained centrally, and that we're doing those periodic scans and have the policies around it, will help put those controls in place.
And Shane, just to follow up to that, when you look at credit unions doing that, do you see most of them, so a lot of them do it on campus or within the credit union, but when the laptops, do you still see credit unions try to generally apply policies to block USB drives and things of that nature?
Yes, that's huge. Just we should be blocking USB drives across all devices and documenting any exceptions to that.
Yeah, and one other thing to just come up with that, and this is folks will talk about split tunneling, but when you're on these corporate devices, you really want to have them connecting to the credit union internet. And one of the things we didn't cover too much on this is DLP is more than just your email. It's how you're preventing data leakage from your network. And one of the things that you really try to crack down, especially after you give laptops, you force them on to connect to the credit union's internet when they're interfacing with those things. And you want to avoid scenarios where people could go to a Dropbox or file transfer and move data off the network. So yes, you really treat it the same way you would treat the computers that are on your campus. You want to make sure that those same policies apply to a laptop. And some credit unions do and some don't already use web content filtering to block a lot of that file transfer functionality. So.
Yep, and if you are not doing full tunneling, and even if you are, you know, a great one of the best practices too is to have a local web filtering and or DLP agent on that laptop, so that, you know, it's again preventing, like John said, you know, file sharing sites, you know, Gmail, you know, all those kinds of things where we might be able to exfiltrate data just like we do inside our credit union.
All right, any other questions from anyone in the group before we go ahead and wrap up here? Oh, seeing one. Do you recommend any good file transfer platforms?
I don't know that I want to necessarily, or I don't have recommendations specifically for this call. There are a number of them out there. You know, one I see that I've seen a number of credit unions doing, but I don't necessarily want to, I'm not advocating it for, but I've seen it in use a lot, is LeapFile. But there are a number of them out there. John, I don't know if you wanted to toss on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of platforms out there, and then from a CISO perspective, it's how do you use them, how do you control them, and what are your policies around them? Because they all have, most of them have pretty similar functionality. Some have better user experiences. I think LeapFile is the one I'm most familiar with. When it comes down to the security, though, it really comes to how you've configured these to exchange data with your members is ultimately more important than the system use itself.
Yep. And doing your due diligence on the vendor, you know, making sure that they've got their SOC 2 Type 2 and that it's, you know, clean and they've not had any major breaches and that their controls are sufficient. So.
All right, any last questions or comments as we go to wrap up here? If any come to anybody after the presentation, of course, please feel free to reach out to us at info@ongoingoperations.com. We can make sure your questions or, you know, comments get sent over to our cybersecurity team, to John and Shane. With that, I just want to thank you all for joining us this morning and talking about PII, definitely an important topic as Shane and John were speaking about. And again, if you're interested in downloading that full white paper that has the best practices for working from home, that link's in the chat. It can also be found on our website under our ebooks and VPN. So please feel free to do that and send any questions our way if you have them. And thank you guys for joining. And we hope to see you at our next Lattes and Learning.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.